Hey, how's everybody doing? It's great to see you. In 1999, so it was a while ago, my wife and I led a trip to Israel with a group of college students. And while she was there, she got pneumonia. And so we got back. Doctor said, "Hey, you got pneumonia." She was just knocked out for about a month. And what that meant was it put me in charge of all the cooking in the house. Now, I am a man of many talents, but cooking is not one of them. And so, I can really only make like 4 or 5 things. And so I just started combining things as I could. And so it was a weird thing at my house for a while. Because one night it was a frozen pizza and then with a side item of baked beans. Another night it was grilled cheese with rice. And I was just making anything I knew how to make, and that was it. And then one night I had made I made a frozen, like one of those Red Baron frozen pizzas, and I cooked it way up, like more than a human should have to cook it. And but that was all we had. So I just cut it up, and Carrie said, "Bob, you treat me like a goddess." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why is that?" She says, "Because every night you present me with a burnt sacrifice." But we have this idea of what, I believe sometimes we have a wrong idea of what sacrifice is. And most of the time when we think about sacrificing, it's that we're losing something, when really just the opposite is true. I've learned that God uses sacrifice to transform me into the person that He wants me to become. But the thing about sacrifice is that sacrifice sounds like it hurts. So most of us try to avoid it as much as possible. But if we really thought about it, we would realize that really few things in life come to us without some level of sacrifice. And sacrifice is the vehicle that God uses to bring about change in our lives. You think about an area of your life that you want to change. And here's the thing. You think about an area you want to change, and whatever it is, sacrifice is going to have to be involved. So if you say, "Man, I want my marriage to change," you're going to have to sacrifice for the sake of your spouse. You say, "Man, I want my career to change," you're probably going to have to sacrifice and work real hard for not that much and kind of work your way up and do your very best for the company and not have "I'm only going to do what they pay me to do" kind of mentality. If you want your relationship with God to change, listen, sacrifice something that consumes a lot of your time and give that time to God in service and in obedience. And we're going to spend some time this morning looking at a story that is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's a story of sacrifice. But it's not the story of one person sacrificing. It's a story of an entire nation sacrificing. For what? For the purpose of building a house for God. It's the moment when the people of Israel have finally gathered together and they sacrifice for the sake of building a house for God, the temple itself. And the result, here's what's amazing, the result was not everyone having less. The result was a revival happening in Israel and everyone experiencing God's presence more. And some of you were here last week. I know some of you weren't because you needed to catch 9 hours of coverage for the Super Bowl. But some of you missed what we talked about last week, in that we were starting a brand new campaign that's called Coming Home. And we showed the master plans for the property and all that stuff. And we talked about, listen, that this project is not just about us. It's for the countless thousands of people that live in this community who don't know the Lord. And so one of the things we talked about last week, if you don't know, is that we're the only church out here. It's us, and that's it. And we're not only are we the only church out here, but we're going to be the only church that actually has a piece of property and a building on it. And so with that comes great responsibility. The Bible says that whom much is given, much will be required. And so we have been given a sacred trust. We've been given an incredible responsibility by God to reach our city with the gospel. And so we've talked about how does that vision become a reality. And this house for God will be built in the same way that the very first house was built. through the sacrifice of God's people. And so I want to invite you to open with me to 1 Chronicles 29. That's where we're going to be today. Those of you who are like, hey, whatever happened to the Malachi study? We're going back to the Malachi study next week. And we're going to start chapter 3 of that. But we're in 1 Chronicles 29 today, and that's where we're going to spend the duration of our time together. And so you got your Bible, open it there, your Bible app, iPad, whatever you got, open it up. 1 Chronicles 29, I'm going to start reading in verse 1. It says, "Furthermore, King David said to the assembly, 'My son Solomon, whom alone God has chosen, is young and inexperienced, and the work is great, because the temple is not for man, but for the Lord God. Now, for the house of my God I have prepared with all my might, gold for the things to be made with gold, silver for the things of silver, bronze for the things of bronze, iron for the things of iron, wood for the things of wood, onyx stones, stones to be set, glistening stones of various colors, all kinds of precious stones and marble slab in abundance. Moreover, because I have set my affection on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house, my own special treasure of gold and silver, 3,000 talents of gold, of the gold of Ophir, of 7,000 talents of refined silver to overlay the walls of the houses, gold for the things of gold, silver for the things of silver, and all kinds of the work to be done by the hands of craftsmen.' And then he says this, 'Who then is willing to consecrate himself this day to the Lord?'" Now if you pause there and give me your attention, there's 3 things that I want to show you about sacrifice and what it does. And here's the first one if you're a note taker. And that is that sacrifice is a picture of devotion. It's a picture of devotion. Now there's several things that happen here, but one of the things that David does, he says, "I have set my affection toward the house of God." Another translation says that because of my devotion to God and to build this house. And that word affection, that word devotion is the same Hebrew word. It's a word, rasa in Hebrew. And it refers to, it's a very interesting word because it's a word that priests use to talk about a sacrifice that's acceptable to God. And so David looks on and he says, God has done so much for me that I want to just do an offering that is so over and above that I know God would be pleased with. And and it wasn't so much that the value of it, even though scholars estimate the value of everything David listed there to be, if we translated that into today's value, it would be somewhere close to $16 billion that he was giving. But it wasn't simply the amount, it was the sacrifice behind it. David was a lover of God and saw this as an opportunity to do something for him. And because that's what love does. Love finds a way to sacrifice for whatever the object of that love is. And so we always put our treasure where our heart is. And that's what Jesus would said. He said that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So this past Friday, 2 days ago, my wife and I celebrated 16 years of holy matrimony. Yeah, very excited about that. That says a lot more about her than it does me, because it's a great deal for me. Because she's more beautiful than even when we met, and I have way less hair. And so anyway, we celebrated 16 years as our 16th wedding anniversary. So my brother and sister-in-law watched all 3 of our kids, and I took Carrie to a hotel on Fort Lauderdale Beach that cost more than my first car. So I was a little anyway. So you ever have that? Like you're gonna buy something online. You're like, you're having like you're using the breathing techniques that they taught your wife when you're gonna have your first child. That's kind of how I was. And but here's the thing: is that I booked the room, and I booked the room on my American Express card. So because of it, they had some thing going on where I got an automatic upgrade when I did it, and then it included breakfast. It had several other things, and But then they said, do you have any additional comments? And so I wrote, because I just figured they might do something for us. And I put 16th anniversary, first time away from our kids. So we get there on Friday. And so they're like, oh, well, we get there and like, happy anniversary, Mr. and Mrs. Franquiz. And we're so glad that you're here. And so they said, well, we see that you have this package and you got this room, we upgraded this room, but we know it's your anniversary, we're going to upgrade you again. And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. And then they're like, well, we also want to do this, and we want to give you access to the concierge lounge. It's normally like $200, but you just go in there and have fun and whatever. And then every time we ate on the property, I mean, they just every time. I mean, it was like we actually had to tell them to stop because they're like, hey, whoa, happy anniversary, and we brought you a dessert, and then we brought you champagne, and we brought you all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't drink that. I think that stuff tastes horrible. And then they brought me one for breakfast, and I'm like, what do you take me for? And like it's 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't even think drinkers are drinking this early. And so anyway, but I thanked them anyway. But anyway, so we had this whole thing, and so we get up to the room. We get up to the room, and it's got this amazing view of Fort Lauderdale Beach, and it was really stunning. And then my wife, and I don't know how much she was overhearing of like these upgrades they were doing or whatever, but she gets to the room, she's totally blown away. She's like, Bob, I can't believe you did this. And then they knocked on the door, and she's like, who's this? And once again, I didn't ask for this, but they actually sent room service up to us. They sent us these chocolate-covered strawberries, and it said happy anniversary on it, and it was just super nice of them. And she's like, Bob, you did all this for me? Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact. And I said, well, I did some of it. I did this. I said, well, it was actually me and Amex. And there's a guy named Jeff at the front desk. He helped too. That all of us together, we're putting this thing on. Now, and the whole thing is that it just, this is what love does. It just finds a way to sacrifice. Now, if I can contrast this, and if you'll suffer another one of my stories for a minute. So I'm going to have you just hold that amazing, hotel experience to the other side. A friend of mine from high school wants to date this girl. He finally gets her to go out on a date with him, and he's telling me what he's going to do, and I'm like, listen, if you ever want to have a second date with her, you don't want to do this. This is the worst idea I've ever heard. So anyway, he doesn't take my advice, and here's what he does. So I said, so where did you guys go? Well, I picked her up, and I took her to a dollar movie. Okay, some of you don't remember that there were actually dollar movie theaters, but there was a time in this world that there were dollar movie theaters. And you would just go, you'd pay $1, and you would watch a movie that was out like 8 years ago. Okay? And it was like, wow, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is playing at the dollar movie. This is like back when Kevin Costner used to act. So anyway, so that you would go to these theaters. So he takes her to a dollar movie. So now he has spent $2 on his date. Then he took her, he drove to this place that was pretty far from where the movie was, to this fast food place called Hot and Now. Does anybody remember Hot and Now? Anyone? There was 3 people in the last service. Renato was the one person who remembers Hot and Now. Okay, a couple other people. Like you're all now admitting to it. Like this isn't like, all right, I admit to it. Anyway, this is too many jokes happening in my mind all at the same time. So here's the thing about Hot and Now. Hot and Now was like, how there's like a certain quality of fast food restaurant. This is like the very bottom, okay? They had 19-cent hamburgers, and then you could upgrade that to 29-cent hamburgers. It was another 20 cents for the fries, and then 39 cents for the drink. It's like, and nobody's shocked they went out of business. It's like, this is just not a good financial model for a sustainable enterprise. Anyway, so he takes her, and by the way, every Hot and Now was in the worst neighborhood, and every Hot and Now I'd ever been to had bullet holes in the glass. Okay, which I don't even know why they would rob them at the prices. There wasn't going to be much money there anyway. So nonetheless, he takes her to Hot and Now. He spends like another $2 on this, fancy meal, even though I think he ponied up and he bought her the cheeseburger, not just the hamburger. So anyway, so you get the burger, the fries. Anyway, it turns out to be the whole thing with the drink, like another $2. Then after he wines and dines her at Hot and Now, and then they had this delightful time at the Dollar Movie, he takes her at the end of the date to 7-Eleven and buys her a 99-cent ice cream sandwich. And anyway, needless to say, they're not married and living happily ever after. In fact, she never spoke to him after that. And it just shows. And you could say, well, didn't he like her? And here, this is every time I've told the story to someone, like a friend of mine, they're like, but didn't he like her? Like, yeah, but see, and here's the thing. The lack of investment showed really where his heart was. It's like, well, he must have not really cared that much, because if he really cared, he would have done a little more by way of investment. And this is the thing that happens, is that sometimes we want to go that route, like the Hot and Now route, for what we can do as opposed to the kind of nice hotel route. And David, in the story that we're reading, when he decides, hey, I want to do all of this for the house of God, is that he doesn't look at how little can I do and still be okay with God. Instead, he sees how much God has done for him, and he says, here's what I want to figure out. How can I just give out as much as I can to the work of God, because God has done so much for me. When David was looking for the land on which to build the temple, which now, today, you can go to it. It's called the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock sits there. And he goes to a man by the name of Araunah, who owned this piece of land, and offers to buy it. The guy Araunah says, King, if you want it, I'll just give it. If for what you're going to do it, I'll just give it to you. And I want you to see what King David says. I put it in your notes in 2 Samuel 24. Then the king said to Araunah, no, I will surely buy it from you for a price, nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which costs me nothing. You see, the whole thing that David understands is that it's not a sacrifice unless it's a sacrifice. And David says, I'm not going to give to the Lord that which cost me nothing. And once again, as we talked about this campaign last week and what we're doing, and those of you that gave to Blueprint, and those of you that are committing even today, or you committed last week, the first place to start is remembering all that God has done for us. That's where David begins. And he says, David says, I want to sacrifice out of my devotion, out of my affection for what God has done for me. And that's where we begin. You see, and by the way, let me say this, and I think sometimes this is where there can be a misunderstanding, because, David gives this thing $16 billion almost, and it's like, who's going to compete with that, right? I mean, who can even dream of competing with that? You don't need to compete with that. The goal here is not a contest of who can give more, but instead it's because everybody has been blessed financially in different ways and at different levels. But the issue is not the equality of the size of the gifts, it's the equality of the sacrifice. Jesus would say it this way. I love this story. He says, and now Jesus sat opposite to the treasury and saw how people put money into the treasury. And many who were rich put in much. Then one widow came and threw in 2 mites, which makes a quadrans. And so he called his disciples to himself and said to them, assuredly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. For they put in out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. Now, she gives these 2 mites. And what are 2 mites? Well, obviously 2 mites are a quadrans. Well, that answers that question. Well, let me just tell you what in our currency, what it would be. A mite, 2 mites, a quadrans, would be half of a penny. She gave half of a penny. And Jesus was blown away that she gave. Why? Because everybody else gave. But she gave through a level of sacrifice that was actually costing her, because it's not a sacrifice unless it's a sacrifice. And that was the issue. And it was the sacrifice behind the gift that pleased the Lord and that expressed devotion to him. Now look at what happens in verse 6. David says in verse 5, who is willing to consecrate himself to the Lord, to this day to the Lord. And look what happens in verse 6. It says, then the leaders of the fathers' houses, leaders of the tribes of Israel, the captains of thousands and of hundreds, with the officers over the king's work, offered willingly. And they gave for the work of the house of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 darics of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. And whoever had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the house of the Lord, into the hand of Jehiel the Gershonite. And then the people rejoiced, for they offered willingly, because with a loyal heart they offered willingly to the Lord. And King David also rejoiced greatly. Now, if you pause there and give me your attention, here's the second thing I want to share, and that is that sacrifice is motivated by joy. That's the motivation behind sacrifice. Sacrifice is not motivated by guilt. It's not motivated by compulsion. That's why the verse says that whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly, whoever sows bountifully will reap bountifully, but that God loves a cheerful giver, because sacrifice is motivated by joy. The people were filled with joy when they gave towards the temple. And can I tell you this? The check that I write every month that fills me with joy is the check that I write to the work of the Lord here at Calvary. Right? Maybe that's true with you. That's the one that gives you the most joy. I don't get any joy out of writing a check to FPL. When I write the city of Miramar a check for my water and sewer services, I don't feel a tingle all over my body. I don't know, but it's when I give to the work of God that I'm filled with joy. And listen, God is delighted when your heart is filled with joy when you give. That's what he's looking for, is the heart and the motivation behind it. And they knew, listen, the people here, they rejoiced because they offered willingly. They rejoiced because they knew the importance of what they were giving to. Now, some of you weren't here last week, and I want to run through a couple of pictures. And if you say, oh man, I already saw those pictures, well, don't worry. There's about 7 or 8 pictures that I held back last week that I'm going to show you this week, just because you know I like to bring the sizzle. All right? Every week I like to bring the sizzle. So anyway, let me show you. This is the site plan, and you guys saw this last week. And the cool thing is, as I show these pictures, some have asked me some questions, and so I'm going to try to answer some of the questions, the common ones that people ask me. And they said, are all 3 of these going to be built at the same time? And the answer is no. We're going to build, obviously, the parking lot. We have to get all of the ground ready, but we're actually only building this building in phase 1. Once we move into phase 1, we're going to see, kind of gauge how everything is, depending on our growth and all that. Then we'll go into phase 2. But this is one of the reasons why phase 1 costs a little bit more than the other 2 phases, is because we have to do all of the site work to get the land ready to build on. And so so that's why, you only build the parking lot once. So we don't have to do that for phases 2 and 3, but we have to do it for phase 1. So anyway, this is where we're going to be, is this building right here. And so that'll encompass everything that we do for this first phase. And if we can go to the second one, this is what it's going to look like. So for those of you that haven't seen it, this is your ooh and ah moment. And you'll see kind of this big open piazza. You'll see across here, you'll see this outdoor baptistry. And and then this building right here this is the main auditorium. This will be where we house everything. But once we build everything out, this will be children's on the bottom floor, administrative offices for our staff on the top floor, and then this is going to be youth, cafe, and then some classroom space for us to do different classes that we do during the weekend, on the weekend. Now, this is what it looks like at night, which is my favorite picture. But if we can go to the next one, this is a model. The next one is a model of what it's going to look like. It's the next one that I wanted to, okay, I forgot about this one. This is the floor plan that we're working with, and you'll see this is the floor plan for phase 1. This is about a 500-seat auditorium right here, and then all of this is children's space. This is for our whole children's ministry. This is administrative offices right here, and then this is restrooms, cafe, and then we'll have some tables out here, and this is kind of like a big open foyer lobby area. The next one is a little better shot of it. So this is entrance, kind of the big foyer area, children's ministry, auditorium, stage, restrooms, cafe. It'll be just like this except with a roof. So, but the next picture is the thing I haven't shown you yet, and this is the theming that we're doing for our children's ministry in there. And so what we're doing here is the architects that we work with, they brought some things to the table, and they said, they spent a weekend with us, and they said, hey, here's some of the things that we brought. And so they, because our emphasis here at Calvary is so heavy on making disciples, of reaching people, helping all of us grow in the faith, and even from adults all the way down to children. One of the things that we're so committed to that they came in with this theme of this kind of Cape Canaveral astronaut kind of theme that they're calling, with the Great Commission of making disciples, they called it commission control, and we absolutely loved it. And so you have this whole idea, authorized personnel only, and then, what would look like all the TV monitors. This is actually a picture from the movie The Incredibles. So if you're like, hey, isn't that Mr. Incredible? It is, but we're not going to use that picture. But in fact, if you go to the next slide, it'll show you the pictures, some of the pictures we are going to use, which is this whole idea of, seeking the Lord, being equipped for service. So you'll see that in the commission control. If you go to the next one, you'll see kind of the concept for check-in. And it's got the whole idea is this whole kind of like Epcot, you're going in and you're checking in for the mission, and so you'll see kind of the launching pads, that kind of idea that we're looking at. You go to the next slide, and this is some of the graphics that we're going to have, like the signage. So you have this, random person looking for signage. This is where he's going to go. The next one is the sign for the building, and then this is what it looks like at night, and which I like. And let me see. I think these guys gave me like a little chart to know if I was out of. Oh, one more. There's one more, and this is the inside, how we're going to just inform everybody things that are going on. So this is just going to be signage inside, and depending on resources and investment and all that, this can either be we can print these out, or these could actually be like LED monitors, and these could all the pictures could rotate depending on what activity or event we're doing at the time. So that's all of that I wanted to show you. But here, now, for those of you that weren't here last week, or you were here last week and you've already forgotten, let me break down, because the question that always comes up is, hey, I love it. When are we going to move in? That's one of the two questions. And we're looking at about 18 months. So probably about September of next year, August, September of next year. That's kind of the idea. And then the second question is, I love it when we're going to move in. And the second question is, I love it, but how much is it going to cost? And I'm glad you asked that question. So the foundation that we're working with, which loaned us a portion of the money for us to be able to buy the land, is also going to give us a loan to buy, to construct phase one of the building. And so what they're going to loan us is $1.5 million for the construction of the building. What that's going to leave is $1.5 million because it's going to cost us about $3 million to build the building and do all the site work and do the parking lot and all that kind of stuff. And that's why we started this past week. Last week we introduced the idea of this new campaign called Coming Home, which is 24 months long, and it's going to raise the resources that we need to build phase one of the master plan. And we call it Coming Home for two reasons. Number one, because this is going to be the place that we call home. But number two, because this is going to be the place where our community is going to hear the gospel and come home to God. And so, how do we raise $1.5 million over the next 24 months and move in? Now, here's the cool thing, is that I spoke with a group of leaders here at Calvary a few weeks ago, shared the vision of all of this, and said, hey, this is where God is moving us. This is the great opportunity that we have. And within that group of 50 people, that group of 50 committed just over $300,000 over the next 24 months, which is amazing for a small group of 50 people. Last week we shared it, we shared the vision, and we said, I know many of you want to go home and pray about it and then come back this week and say, hey, I'm ready. I know what the Lord wants me to do. But there was a group of people that were like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing right now. And that last week, there was about another $100,000 committed. So right now, there's about $400,000 committed, which leaves us $1.1 million to raise as a church. Now you say, well, how does that work? I mean, how could that? What does that look like? Let me show you this chart if I can, because one of the common things that I hear is, Pastor, I wish I could write the church a check for $1 million, and I appreciate that heart, I do, but the reality is that if we sit around waiting for one person to write a check for $1 million, we're probably going to be waiting for a long time. What the reality is that it's probably not going to be one person writing a check for $1 million. It's probably going to be all of us being sacrificial for the sake of these next 2 years to see this vision become a reality. Now check this out, because I think sometimes we underestimate what we think we can do over the course of a period of time. Now look at what happens here. If a person says, hey, I want to give $100 a month more than my normal tithing and giving, over 24 months, that's $2,400 that they're committing over the course of this next 2 years. Someone decides, I want to give $200 a month. That's almost $5,000 that they're giving, just saying, hey, I'm going to commit $200. Which is a significant portion. Someone says, I'm going to give $300. That's $7,200. $500 a month for 24 months is $12,000. $750 for 24 months, $18,000, $1,000 a month, and you can just keep doing the math on the way up. And so, if I can go to the next slide, and that is like, how do we see this become a reality? And this is really what it would take. I mean, if we had one person commit $250,000, 2 people commit $100,000, 3 people commit $50,000, 6 people commit $25,000, 25 people commit $10,000, 50 people commit $5,000, 100 people commit $1,000. That's $1.5 million right there, and and people are committing things all in between as well. And so now, one of the things that I think helps people frame it, because they say, hey, I want to commit this, but what is it actually? It's like, hey, I want to commit this, but what would I actually be investing in if I did it? Now, let me show you this next slide that I think is helpful. In fact, can I go to the second one first, if that's all right? If a person said, hey, I'm going to commit $200 over a month for the next 24 months, which is almost $5,000, right? What would that person be investing in? They'd be, essentially, this $5,000 would buy 1 installed pair of glass entrance doors, so the glass doors when you walk in, 1 ton of installed steel, property survey that has to be done, 1 installed parking lot light, and furniture for the children's ministry, or for a children's ministry class. Someone gave $10,000. It's a projector and a screen, an exterior sign, and irrigation system for all the landscaping for the entire property. If someone gives $25,000, it could be a stage system. It could be the infrastructure for the audiovisual and lighting, civil engineering fees, permitting fees, and painting for the entire building. $50,000, what would that do? That would do all the floor finishes, all the environmental graphics, which is the stuff, all the commission control stuff that we looked at, the entire plumbing system, and the sprinkler system. If someone gives $100,000, that would be half of the electrical system. If I can go to the first one, and then you kind of work your way down. If someone says, $2,500 is 1 installed plumbing fixture, 5 light fixtures, and 1 parking space. That's a pretty cool thing, buying a parking space. You don't get your name on it, but you still you get to buy a parking space. And then you just kind of work your way down and what it does. And some of these are like, it's 10 chairs, an installed lighting fixture, a set of bathroom accessories. But the cool thing, and I think it helps all of us when we think about it in terms of this idea of, hey, I want to invest, and I know that what I'm investing, this is what's going to happen. This is what is going to be purchased for the building with the investment that I make. And I say that, and here's the thing that I shared this last week, and I'm going to share it again, and I think it's important for me to do so. David stands up and he leads the way with generosity and says, hey, this is what I'm doing over for the work of the Lord, of this temple that's being built. And Carrie and I felt the same way, that if we were going to lead this, that we had to lead the way when it comes to generosity. And so you can be aware, my wife and I are making the biggest financial commitment that we've ever made to anything to this campaign. I mean, we're committing more than we paid for our first house to this campaign, and it's going to take being creative and all of that, and probably me doing some more writing to make this happen. But we really believe that if we're going to lead the charge, then we have to lead the way when it comes to generosity. And I had someone come up to me the other day, this past week, and they said, Pastor Bob, I'm committed and I'm a little nervous. Is it normal to be nervous? And I said, it's okay to be nervous. I'm a little nervous too. I think that's how you know you've actually stepped out in faith, is that you've gotten a little nervous. But more than anything, I'm a little nervous, but filled with joy over the fact that God is going to do an amazing work over this campaign, and God's going to do a work in me over this campaign. When my wife and I committed to Blueprint, I told the story last week, it was the biggest commitment that we had ever made in our lives. I mean, I had never even spent that much money on a car before we made that commitment. And but we knew that the Lord was leading us to do this. We made this commitment. It was not even 90 days later that I had signed a multi-book contract with the third largest Christian publisher in the United States, and that was half of our commitment, was right there. And God began to open opportunities for me like never before. And what we thought was going to take the full 15 months that the Blueprint campaign was, we ended up finishing 6 months early, because God had just blessed us in ways that we never even realized and never even dreamed that would happen. And so the point that I make in all of this is that more than raising money, this campaign is really about God raising his kids and teaching us to trust him more than we thought possible. Because when I was making the commitment to Blueprint, when I was making the commitment to coming home, if my only factor was, well, I'm just going to make a budgetary decision, I never would have made the significant commitment that I made. And I never would have seen God intervene and work something that wasn't even on my radar. But instead, it was much more than just a budgetary decision. That was part of it. But there was also a faith component to it. And there was a statement that that my wife and I were talking about, and that we just have continued talking about ever since that happened. And we just kept saying, how big is your God? How big is your God? What can your God do? That's why the Apostle Paul in Philippians, he says, and he doesn't say, and God will. He says, and my God shall supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. And it's this idea that's why these people responded with radical generosity, is because they said, hey, God is so much bigger than what I could possibly ask, think, or imagine. And that God had saved them. And listen, unless there's misunderstanding, these people weren't giving so that God would love them. Oh, well, they were giving so that God would love them and so that they would go to heaven and whatever. No. They already had those things. They were already loved by God. They already had God's favor. They were already, heaven and eternity, that was already secure. They were giving out of a response to those things. And then they saw God work in their lives, because sacrifice is always motivated by joy. It was motivated by joy for them. It was motivated, the model of this is Jesus, that he sacrificed. It's not in your notes, but in Hebrews 12:2, it says this: looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, we're going to finish the story here, but I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward and hand out the commitment cards to coming home, because we want you to have one of those. And so I'm going to finish. While they're doing that, I'm going to read the last few verses that says this. It says, therefore David blessed the people. David blessed the Lord before all the assembly, and David said, blessed are you, Lord God of Israel, our Father forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power and the glory, the victory and the majesty, for all that is in heaven and in earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head over all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over all. In your hand is power and might, and in your hand is to make great and to give strength to all. Now therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. But who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to offer so willingly as this? For all things come from you, and of your own we have given you. For we are aliens and pilgrims before you, as were also our fathers, and our days on the earth are as a shadow and without hope. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have prepared to build you a house for your holy name is from your hand and is all your own. Now, if you pause there and give me your attention, here's the last thing I want to share with you before we close, and that is this, that sacrifice breaks the grip of greed. Sacrifice breaks the grip of greed. I used to have this Chevy Cavalier when I was in college. When I was first starting college, my dad helped me buy it. And someday I'll tell you the story of how it became infested with cockroaches. And it was actually a cockroach training center. And I know this because I would get up to my car at night and I would see them doing laps on my steering wheel. But anyway, someday I'm going to tell you that story, but that's not today. But one day, Carrie and I are driving, and we had just gotten married, and we were driving, and she opens up my glove box, and she pulls out this pink sheet of paper. And she says, "What is this?" And I said, "Oh, that's the title to the car." And she says, "That's what I thought. Are you out of your mind?" And I said, "Why do you say that?" She says, "Because you don't drive around with the title to your car in there." She says, "You know, if somebody steals your car and has the title, they actually own the car now." And I said, "Well, you know, that's good to know. I didn't know that. If you want to know secrets about, you know, things about ancient Mesopotamia, I'm your guy." And but I didn't know that. And listen, that is essentially what David is saying in this prayer. He says this. He's talking about ownership. And he says this, "God, you own the pink slip. You have the title on everything. Everything is yours, and we owe nothing. And we own nothing." And here's why this is so important. And this is the thing that whenever I teach this, I just, you know, my prayer is like, God, if we would get this, then everything would change. I really believe that your spiritual maturity depends on understanding this principle. And the reason I say that is because you cannot grow to spiritual maturity and live like an owner. Only stewards. You've got to live like a steward. And those are the people that grow to maturity in Christ, because they aren't at odds with God and making stuff an issue. Now let me explain why I say that. There's a verse here that I put in your notes in Deuteronomy chapter 10. It says, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God and walk in his ways, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, to keep his commandments, to keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his statutes, which I command you today for your good. Indeed, heaven and the highest heavens belong to the Lord your God, and also the earth and all that is in it." Now listen, Deuteronomy is a series of addresses that Moses gives the people before they're entering the promised land. And what he does is he tells the people, hey, this is what God requires. It's that you respect him, the Lord, obey the Lord, serve the Lord. And then he says, oh, and by the way, God owns everything. Everything in heaven, the earth, and everything that's even in it is his. Why? Why would he share that? After telling the people what God requires of them. Because these people were going from being slaves to now taking possession of an entire country. They were going to have land, they were going to have houses, they were going to have fields that they never had before. And so God is telling them all this, saying, hey, I don't want you to go in here and think that you are now the owner of these things. You need to go in there and thinking, I am the steward, I am the manager of these things. All of these things are God's. And he has simply entrusted them to me. Because the tendency that they would have is to go into the land and think, I used to be a slave, but now I'm an owner. But that's actually not what he had for them. Instead, he was explaining to them that the land was his. Their relationship with God was tied to the land that he was entrusting to them. And that's why I say that you can't grow to maturity and act and think like an owner. Is because the only thing that kept Israel in the land was their commitment to God. The day they stopped connecting the fact that the land belonged to God and that they were stewards of the land, when they started seeing it as theirs, that's when they started bringing in idols who would make it rain. They would start worshiping other gods that would make the ground give fruit, instead of realizing that it would all belong to God. It was not their problem. They were not owners. They were simply required to act like stewards, managing it for the actual owner. You see, most of us know the verse where Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow and all that stuff, right? Most of us know that verse, for tomorrow has enough problems, just deal with today. But a lot of us don't know the context of that statement. The context of that statement is about money. It's about being a steward and not an owner. And now let me read you the verses leading up to the don't worry stuff. Here's what he says. No one can serve two masters, for either he'll hate the one and love the other, or else he'll be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or God and money. Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is your life not more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are you not of more value than they? The idea is that if God is who you follow, then we experience peace, not this worry and anxiety over, well, how's it all going to work out?